The delicate chime of crystal glasses filled the room as my father hoisted his fourth whiskey of the night. "To success," he declared, voice loud and theatrical, "and to those who truly understand what it demands." His gaze locked with mine from across the table, stern, unyielding, and loaded with silent judgment. I quietly sipped my water, absorbing his disdain like I always had. To them, I was still Oliver Bennett, the family misfire, the one who couldn't seem to land a real job. If only they knew that just hours earlier, I had been inside a secure room with the Bank of England's top brass, finalizing a strategy that would steer the entire country away from economic disaster. "Still unemployed, Oliver?" Uncle Richard sneered, his voice soaked in amusement. "What's it been, half a year?" 8 months, Margaret corrected with a glance at her diamond-studded watch. "A token from her Goldman Sachs husband, and I'm not sure we should count those consulting gigs he keeps mentioning." I cut into my beef Wellington with a composed smile. Those consulting gigs had quietly stabilized 3 major financial institutions and reshaped our foreign debt policy. But they didn't need to know that. Not yet. "I'm managing," I replied calmly. My father gave a gruff laugh. "Managing to squander an Oxford education. More like, your brother leads our firm, Margaret married into Goldman, and you float through odd jobs like a leaf in the wind." The irony was stifling. To them, I was a directionless 35-year-old. In reality, the Prime Minister had me on speed dial. My models were now the backbone of Britain's recovery roadmap. But my clearance required strict confidentiality. Not even my family could know. Speaking of high achievers, my mother chimed in. "Did you see the news about that mystery advisor transforming our economy? They say he's single-handedly avoiding a recession." I took another measured sip. I'd seen the headlines, the shadow economist. They'd called me the unseen force behind the country's resurgence. "Probably some bureaucrat with real credentials," James quipped, his eyes slicing toward me. "Someone with commitment and drive." My phone buzzed under the table. A message from Sarah at the PM's office. "Emergency meeting, 10 p.m. Brussels situation, urgent." "Excuse me," I said, rising from my chair. "I've got to handle something." "Always an exit," my father muttered. Never any accountability. If only he knew I wasn't escaping. I was heading to contain a looming international crisis. In my car, I swapped my casual dinnerwear for the tailored suit I kept ready for moments like this. 20 minutes later, I was ushered through the back door of 10 Downing Street, where the Prime Minister and his senior team were waiting. "Oliver," the PM greeted me with urgency. "The ECB's backing down on the stability framework. We need your brilliance." The next 4 hours passed in a blur of revised projections and tense negotiations with Brussels via secure line. By 2 a.m., a crisis had been averted, one that could have crippled the European economy. "You've done it again," the PM said, visibly relieved. "I truly don't know where we'd be without you." I thought of the dinner table, of the smirks and condescension. "Just doing my part, sir," I said. By the time I returned to my modest flat, the same one my family assumed I struggled to pay for, it was nearly sunrise. My phone rang. "Margaret. Mom and Dad are worried," she barked without a hello. "You vanished with no explanation. Ever think about anyone but yourself?" I looked down at the front page of the financial papers sprawled across my desk. Every headline screamed about the narrowly avoided catastrophe, one I'd quietly neutralized. "Sorry," I replied. "Something came up." She sighed sharply. "It always does. Look, the charity gala's next week. Try, for once, to act like an adult." Ah yes, the annual gala, London's glittering showcase of wealth, influence, and family pride. Every year, another round of subtle digs and public comparisons. But this year would be different. The Prime Minister himself would be attending. Not to schmooze, not for business, but for me. After years in the shadows, he was ready to reveal the identity of the man behind Britain's miraculous economic rebound. "I'll be there," I told Margaret. I wouldn't miss it. After the call, I turned back to my secure laptop. The numbers were better than projected, unemployment down, foreign investments up, the pound surging. A new message pinged from the Bank of England's governor. "Stunning data. The PM's right, it's time the world knows." I walked to my window, watching London stir to life. This city had no idea how close it came to collapse, and it certainly had no idea that the so-called black sheep of the Bennett family had pulled it back from the edge. Next week, that would change. At their precious gala, the truth would finally come to light. My father's voice echoed in my memory, "You drift between jobs like a lost ship." I smiled. Sometimes, the black sheep isn't lost at all. Sometimes, he's just running a different course entirely. Every family dinner, every smug phone call, every helpful suggestion to apply for entry-level roles felt like another coil tightening around a spring wound taut, waiting for the inevitable snap. I was seated in my real office, a secure, classified floor buried within Whitehall, when James called. "No pleasantries today?" I said. "Father wants you to look presentable at the gala," James replied, his tone clipped. "He's arranged for you to borrow one of my old suits. Can't have you showing up in one of your clearance rack disasters." I glanced down at the midnight blue Tom Ford suit I was currently wearing, tailored, immaculate, and worth more than James's entire wardrobe. How thoughtful. Oh, and one more thing, don't talk shop at the gala. These are serious guests. Oliver, CEOs, board members, real economists. Through the bulletproof glass of my window, I could see the silhouette of the Bank of England, where just this morning I had pitched a stabilization strategy that would ripple through the global markets. I'll keep that in mind. And rumor has it the Prime Minister may show up, he added, lowering his voice as if I'd never spoken to the man. "Best you avoid him altogether. We'd rather not have you embarrassing the family in front of someone that important." I ended the call without a word and turned back to my screens, displaying live data streams from global markets. Sarah stepped into the office, dropping a stack of intelligence briefs onto my desk. "Another pep talk from James?" she asked, clearly amused. "They see what they've always chosen to see," I said, scanning the new data. "But that's about to change." She smiled. "The PM's looking forward to it. He's rearranged diplomatic calls just to make the announcement personally." That afternoon, I had a more delicate assignment, tea with my mother and her well-heeled social circle. I arrived 10 minutes late at her favorite private club, purposefully wearing a wrinkled shirt and slightly scuffed shoes, the uniform of the wayward son they expected. "Oh, Oliver," my mother sighed. "The disappointment practiced. You couldn't even iron your shirt?" Her companions glanced at one another with the quiet thrill of women who gossip for sport. These were the wives of hedge fund executives, politicians, aristocrats, women who dealt in prestige like currency. "Did you catch the news this morning?" Mrs. Blackwood chirped. "There's talk of a mysterious economist. Apparently his model has completely reshaped the recovery effort." "My husband's quite taken with him," added Mrs. Henderson. "He said the Americans are now referencing his frameworks in internal briefings." I stirred my tea without comment, remembering the secure video call I'd had with the Federal Reserve just hours earlier. "Speaking of jobs," my mother interjected sweetly, "Oliver's still on the hunt for something stable. Perhaps your husbands have an opening. Something junior, naturally." Pity flickered across the table like candlelight. "Of course, dear," Mrs. Blackwood cooed. "Everyone stumbles before they find their way." Then my secure phone buzzed. "Russell's crisis escalating. Immediate presence required at Downing Street." I rose. "Sorry, Mother, work calls." She narrowed her eyes. "Another one of your little consulting errands? Honestly, Oliver, when will you take your life seriously?" By the time she finished her sentence, I was already en route to Downing Street. James called again, his voice full of fury. "You embarrassed Mother in front of everyone. Mrs. Henderson's husband is the finance minister. He might have helped you get a real job." I smiled, thinking of the closed-door meetings where I'd corrected that same finance minister more times than I could count. I'm sure he could have. The days leading up to the gala blurred into a stream of late-night meetings and emergency plans. My family's messages came in like clockwork, more concerned with table seating than the global economy. "Margaret, pick up James's suit, and please do something with your hair." "Father, you're at the far table. Don't make a scene." "Mother, important guests attending. Please don't talk about your temporary jobs." Then, on the eve of the gala, the storm broke. An international bank was collapsing. If it fell, the entire European financial structure could follow. I was summoned back to Whitehall. "We need a miracle," the PM said, eyes bloodshot. "If this spreads, we're finished." For 18 hours straight, I worked, modeling scenarios, adjusting forecasts, crafting a rescue blueprint tight enough to stabilize the bank but discreet enough to avoid panic. By sunrise, the threat had passed. We'd won. I hadn't slept. My tie was loosened, my suit rumpled, my phone buzzed with a dozen missed calls and voicemails from James and Margaret, furious I hadn't shown up to collect my assigned suit. "You don't care about this family at all," James barked in his latest message. "You're going to humiliate us." I looked up at my reflection in the office window, bloodshot eyes, unshaven, exhausted. But behind me, London stood steady, because I had kept it steady. In 12 hours, none of their words would matter anymore. Sarah entered the office. "Car's ready to take you home. You should rest before tonight." I collected my briefcase. "Any changes to the PM's schedule?" "He's cleared his evening," he said. "This time, the country needs to see who's behind the curtain." She paused, her expression shifting to something softer. "You sure you're ready? This changes everything." I thought of all the dinners, the belittling remarks, the years spent playing the fool so I could do the real work in peace. "I've been ready a long time," I said. "They just weren't ready for me." My family sat front and center, their smiles fixed, unaware they were moments from unraveling. "Thank you all for having me tonight," the Prime Minister began from the podium, his voice calm but commanding. "As many of you know, our country has endured unprecedented economic turbulence, recessions narrowly avoided, global markets on the brink, international banking systems under threat." My father nodded gravely, as if he'd personally weathered those storms. "But thanks to one extraordinary mind, someone whose brilliance remained hidden for years, we not only survived, we emerged stronger." The room stilled, every glass paused midair, every breath held. "You've heard of him, the shadow economist, the anonymous architect behind our financial recovery, the man behind the reforms that stabilized Europe." And then the moment came. "Tonight, I have the immense honor of introducing him to you all." The Prime Minister's gaze swept the crowd and landed on me. "Oliver, would you join me?" Gasps rippled through the ballroom. My father's cigar slipped from his fingers. Margaret's glass shattered on marble. James looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. I stood, unhurried, and walked to the stage. The click of my polished shoes echoed through the stunned silence. When I reached the podium, the PM embraced me, his voice carrying through the mic. "Thank you for saving this country." Shock gave way to scattered applause, building into something louder, less restrained. "For the last 5 years," the PM continued, "Oliver Bennett has served as our chief economic advisor. His models are now taught at Harvard and Oxford. His crisis frameworks are guiding EU and IMF strategies, all while working in absolute secrecy, even from those closest to him." I stepped forward to speak, steady and clear. "Thank you, Prime Minister. I must say, keeping this secret was made easier by the assumptions people held about me." I glanced at my father. He was frozen, mouth ajar. James stared at his phone, scanning headlines he'd never imagined were about his own brother. Margaret looked ready to faint. "Oliver?" the finance minister called out, startled. "Those absences, all those missed meetings, were spent in Whitehall," I said, "usually correcting your risk forecasts." Uneasy laughter rippled through the room. My mother had sunk into her chair, fanning herself with a napkin like she might evaporate. "And the missed suit fitting last night?" I added. "That was me preventing a major European bank, one some of you represent, from collapse." "You're welcome." The PM smiled proudly beside me. "Thanks to Oliver's tireless work, we're entering the most secure economic period in decades. His reforms are reshaping financial systems worldwide." In the crowd, Margaret whispered, just loud enough, "The consulting jobs, the meetings, were usually with heads of state," I said, nodding, though I always appreciated the helpful tips about entry-level roles. That broke the tension. Applause erupted, laughter, heads turned toward me, suddenly not in mockery, but awe. The rest of the night passed in a daze of shaken hands and sudden praise. CEOs who once ignored me now tripped over themselves to connect. Board members asked for insights I'd already deployed. Men and women who had once dismissed me were now scrambling to associate themselves with the name they had never known, until tonight. My family, however, sat apart, shell-shocked, silenced. My father tried to approach once, then again, but both times, he hesitated, turning back. James repeatedly opened his mouth to speak but found no words. Margaret stood alone in the corner, her world clearly cracked. Finally, my mother approached, tearful. "Oliver, we truly didn't know." I looked at her, my face composed. "No, you didn't, that was kind of the point. But why let us think so little of you?" I met her eyes. Because that version of me was useful, predictable, dismissible. It gave me space to do what mattered, while everyone was busy underestimating me. I turned from her toward the floor, where the PM waited with a final word. "You could have told them years ago," he said quietly. "I would have made the clearance exception." I watched my family from afar, still trying to make sense of the new reality. "Some lessons," I replied, "are better taught with impact. Besides, they never asked. They were so sure they knew me. They never bothered to see." As the gala ended, I gathered my coat to leave. That's when my father finally approached, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard. "Son, we were wrong about you." I straightened my tuxedo. "No, you were right about one thing." He blinked. "I couldn't hold a job. I was too busy running the country's economy." The next morning, every paper in the country carried the story. The shadow economist revealed, government insider unmasked as national hero. My inbox overflowed. Some messages were apologetic, others were desperate to reconnect. Too late. By then, I was back in Whitehall. Crisis never sleeps. Because the thing about being the black sheep is, you're not always lost. Sometimes, you're just operating so far ahead that no one realizes you're leading. Until you turn around. And they finally see you were always at the front.